Hi, I want to make a video on the subject of um, childhood and how those were more innocent times, and how you had more fantasy, you can indulge more in fantasy, and I would say to a certain extent, most of the time when you're an adult, if you're still falling for certain fantasies or delusions or phantasmagorical stories, it's usually because you're in denial and um, you just don't want to accept the truth, and you want to convince yourself, and somehow bring that to a philosophical argument, even though you don't necessarily believe it, and you want to fight for the wrong fight. You want to fight as the enemy against the truth, even though you know the truth, to a certain extent. But I'd say it's a mixture of that and ignorance and just falling for the delusion. Then again, I don't know necessarily every facet of that, but I think it's pretty obvious to a certain extent. That's obviously the case in most instances in describing the delusions that many people more capable of understanding reality are falling for, and why they're falling for certain things. And I think that perfectly describes why many people that can have a coherent conversation, at least understanding philosophy to a certain extent, um, are coming from. Um, that's where many of them are coming from. So I think that's a good way of describing why most people fall for it, and that's why I'm making that distinction between, say, um, I guess this would be more of my own personal interpretation of this kind of thing. Um, as you know, as a child, more than anything, and to a certain extent, many adults can have indulge in fantasies, and they indulge in the whimsical nature of existence. To a certain extent, you have expectations. You think there's something beyond a certain thing. You feel like there's some aura to a certain extent beyond something. You feel like you fall for it more, and generally speaking, than because you're still developing. You don't necessarily see beyond a certain point. You're not thinking as thoroughly or as insightful as you would think as an adult, even though you have certain um, insights that you're thinking of. To a certain extent, you're thinking insightful. You can be very artistic, or you can be very this or that or the other thing. You can have certain aspects of your character that are very deep or interesting, but there's still not much going on. It's still just you're much more reactionary as a kid. But it's about falling for that kind of whimsical nature of existence, feeling like there's something more going on the adventures, um, having things like that, going on your adventures, having greater expectations to what's behind the curtain, even though you just fall for the curtain every time and you just don't realize it, even though you feel like there's something more. It's just you falling for the curtain. And what's behind curtain number one, you just fall for it. You're willing to accept it. You live day by day. You lived in the moment more than anything, and you expect you had um, less understanding and greater expectation of what you can expect out of existence and things along those lines. Really, it's a really simple subject, and I guess it comes partially from personal experience, where you fall for it more. You live in the moment. You wake up, you do your thing. You go to sleep. You wake up. You go through the daily grind, or daily whatever you're doing. You do your daily thing, and then you go on to the next thing, and you went day by day without having much, even though time seemed to have gone slower, even though you were just living day by day then. And now things seem much slower, I mean, much faster, and it seems to be much more grinding than it was, even though it's not necessarily always the easiest thing. It's not necessarily always the easiest thing, but it's something that exists nonetheless. Um, So yeah, it really just means how you live day by day when you were younger, and it may come down to just personal experience I've had, even though it may be something I can generally say is more along the lines. It's something generally it can generally speak for most people that they have this experience, generally speaking, greater than, say, if you're a deluded adult. You generally speaking had more adventurous times. You were more whimsical as a a kid or a child than you are now as an adult. Um, Even if you are still falling for certain delusions, you're not that in that developmental stage where you're more willing to fall for all the mystical characteristics of existence. And I really do think this comes down to my own personal experience. You have a very insightful way of looking at things artistically more, or whatever that means. And then it turns more into philosophical kind of things and recognition of um, reality, and how that turns into more of a psychosis, and how you think about reality, and how it doesn't have much. It doesn't seem to be all that much interesting when you're looking at existence for what it really is, as opposed to looking beyond it, looking past it, looking into the darkness past the screen door, something that doesn't exist beyond the screen door. And that's exactly what's happening. Generally speaking, at least speaking from my experience, and generally speaking for other people, I can think that that is the case for many people, that you're not experiencing exactly the same level of adventure or of expectation. Even though I think it depends on the discrepancy between which you experience it. And discrepancy is important in terms of this because me myself has experienced um, a greater um, discrepancy between um, then and now than I'd say most people. Um, but I don't know. But generally speaking, I'd say more than most people. And I would say that um, to a certain degree, like I keep saying, generally speaking, most people experience some kind of drop in not necessarily imagination or anything like that, but something more along the lines of um, their willingness to accept something greater beyond being fooled by the game, not necessarily falling for it or believing in delusions, but falling for the characteristics of the existence game, the reality game of perception and recognizing, feeling like there's something more, even though you didn't believe in, say, a religion, you still expected more beyond, say, a a sunset. You felt like there was something more than just seeing the sunset. You felt like there was some kind of imagery, something beyond that, even though there wasn't necessarily anything beyond that. You fell for it, and you were more living in the moment and expectations, and your expectation, and not looking and being constantly fooled by, almost as if you have short-term memory, being fooled by the mechanism that's pushing you through your day, as opposed to believing some kind of delusion. It's more of a self-propelling mechanism, more than, say, falling for some kind of um, disciplined delusion that's been shoved down your throat, or that you've fallen for because you happen to have been gullible more than anything. And I guess that's an important distinction to make. Falling for it, or being fooled by the mechanism, and saying a mechanism of you forming and functioning and growing, and being fooled by the function because you have less experience. You're still growing. Say if you, yeah, from a child to an adult, um, as opposed to just falling for some kind of delusion, and not just being living day by day, and not falling for the some sort of delusion is a distinction to make as well. Because some people fall for delusions, and some people just live day by day, and they don't fall for certain things, even though they may have some kind of spiritual sense, at least as they claim, or they have some kind of, they see something in life. They're living day by day. They're not thinking too much about existence. And I think that many people can understand these things to a certain degree, at least understand them, even though they may not experience them in some kind of form of psychoses, or some kind of experience that feeds off of it, saying like anxiety, and you're experiencing something like anxiety and experiencing these thoughts about reality and things like that. So I don't think there's much else to say on this subject. It's another easy subject, just trying to make a video long enough, I guess. Um, how you fall for it more, and you feel like there's something more. A color means something more. You fall for the day by day antics of existence you fall for the mechanism more, not because you're delusional, but just because you're living day by day, and that's the distinction I suppose I want to make. Living day by day and being fooled by the mechanism, growing up, maturing, at least in my circumstance or in many circumstances, generally speaking, for most people, and to a certain extent, the delusion is more what takes over. Um, and that the distinction between that and say something like a delusion that people experience, and delusion is different from just living day by day, feeling like there's an active belief and an active and an unactive kind of belief where you're actively delusional, or you're just passively delusional, or passively falling for life and existing, even though you don't believe in something. Say delusional, you're living day by day, and as opposed to say living delusionally, such as a false belief, like say a religion, some kind of religion or false premise, or falling for anything, being schizophrenic, or anything like that. So that's that's all the distinction I suppose to make, at least in this video. I mean, I always had things to these videos, and I always try to bring up every different angle in these videos. So I'll try to add something else if I think of anything else, but I guess that's all I'm going to add right now before this video becomes too incoherent. So I think that's all I need to say. You're feeling like there's something more. Really, that's the point. And there's a distinction between delusion and living day by day, and the circumstances surrounding those two distinctions, and how, generally speaking, it's for most people, and it's not necessarily the case for all people, but generally speaking, that's the case. And it doesn't mean it's not the case, say, it's not the case for an adult, even if there was a difference as a child, say, living in that whimsy, growing into, say, a more delusional adult as opposed to just falling for the whimsy, I'd say. And that's another distinction. The whimsy, falling for it, living day by day, and the delusions and the facts surrounding those delusions, and um, how that those distinctions and the things that surround those distinctions, that means most, and how you expect there's something so much greater beyond, say, the simple things, even though it's just exactly what it seems. There's nothing beyond it. It's just thin air between you and the thing that you're perceiving, or nothing, something that you can't necessarily touch, but it wouldn't have a touch because the touch doesn't exist. And the touch, if you could touch it or experience it in some way, is just an experience, and there's nothing beyond that experience. You can't change the fundamental nature of this existence, and that's the point too. It can't change, and there's nothing more to this nature or existence than reaction and perception, which is just another reaction. It's just a bunch of interactions reacting, jerking around, causing different interactions based on an initial interaction leading to an end conclusion. That's really it. There's nothing more. Obviously, boiling it down to that isn't obviously simplifying it to a certain extent, but it's explaining exactly what it is. And even though you may say it's something more, the pieces are, some of its parts are greater than the individual pieces. It's still that, and you can see past it, even though the illusion, the self-described illusion, it's one hell of an illusion, doesn't mean that it isn't exactly what it is. It's not an illusion because it's a very definition of reality, and it's about perception, and it no longer becomes the so-called idea of an illusion once you start recognizing exactly what's going on, because it wasn't an illusion to begin with, because there's no other way of defining it other than reality, and the illusion means nothing because it's not an illusion. It's because it's the only way you can experience existence. So by its very definition, it's just reality, and saying it's an illusion is just making an unnecessary distinction. It is an illusion, but in what sense? It's just reality. Making that distinction is pointless and almost in a way confusing the topics and description of what exactly it is at the point at its core, and it's just reality. It's not an illusion. Things are happening a certain way. You can understand it just logically speaking, cause and effect leading to the future. You react with something and it's not an illusion because you can understand it. You're experiencing it. It's not an illusion if you're experiencing reality, and making that distinction is pointless. So I guess that's another thing to add to this video. But those things surrounding, just to make sure I recap again, So it's delusion, the distinction between delusions, and living in the moment. You expect something more beyond it. The simple interactions make a distinction between those things and the interactions that you have, and the distinction between reality and the description of illusion, the one hell of an illusion kind of thing. I think that's it. I don't want to drone on anymore, or pause anymore. But man, making these videos is kind of tedious. At least now it is. But I have an obligation, and I'm trying to fill that obligation. So, gotta get it done. I feel it. I feel the obligation. More than I want to do the obligation, knowing it's going to do some good, at least from what I hope. Obviously, intention doesn't matter, but intention means everything when it comes to the circumstances describing reality. It doesn't matter. It's just a matter of the action that exists or matters. The intention means little. Only means something if nothing happened. But something happened. The intention doesn't mean much. So that's another thing. Something happened. The intention doesn't mean much. At least in terms of reality, it means something. Obviously, if you're trying to say classify a murder, first degree, second degree, manslaughter, first degree, premeditated, things like that, distinctions we make up, and the existence of reality without intention doesn't. With intention, it doesn't really matter. And you get the point. I'm losing track of what I'm saying, but yeah, if something happens, intention doesn't matter, and if something doesn't happen, intention does matter to a certain extent, I think. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, so I think I mentioned everything. I mean, if there's anything else I need to mention, I'll just mention another video. So before I make this video too long, I'll end it now. So thank you, and until next time, bye.